Thank you, thank you. So I have 3 books that Joel will actually put this in the chat box. 3 books that I highly recommend if you want to know more about icons. One is Sacred Doorways, A Beginner's Guide to Icons. Another is by my favorite, Henry Nouwen, Behold the Beauty of the Lord. And then a third is Praying with Icons by Jim Forrest. So if you want to know more, these are good resources. I mean, there are tons of resources out there. But this is where I've gotten the majority of my information, as well as from Father Damien Higgins, who is an iconographer and also a Ukrainian Greek priest in the Catholic Church. He's the one that I was able to write an icon under through a summer retreat back in 2010, I think, that Jim Wood encouraged me to go to, and I'm forever grateful for that, because it was an amazing experience. So Joel, if you could put up the slides, that the first slide, that would be really helpful. Okay, next slide. Great. Okay, so this icon is probably the most famous icon in the world. It's an icon written of the 3 visitors that visited Abraham at the Oaks of Mamre, which is in the 18th chapter of Genesis. And they came and he set a meal before them, and they told him that he was going to have, he and Sarah were going to have a baby. And if you remember, Sarah was in the tent and she laughed. This also, this is called usually the 3 visitors, and it's by Andrei Rublev, who was an iconographer. It's also called the Trinity. So the beautiful thing about icons, and this is actually the best icon to show you the perspective, and I think I used this in a sermon not too long ago. But if you look at the icon, if you look at their feet, you'll see that they're on a platform that the focal point of those lines, that if you were to continue those lines forward, the focal point would be your eyes. And so and the table is leaning, and so the invitation is from the icon for you to come to it, to be a part of it. Icons are really meant to be doorways into the holy. They're not a piece of artwork to enjoy, even though many people look at them and enjoy them, but they're meant to as a doorway to the holy, a doorway to the eternal. And I think this one especially, it just with you being the focal point, invites you into the story, and not into, but it invites you to the table where they're sitting and eating. So again, the majority of what I've learned is from Father Damien Higgins, who is a Ukrainian Greek Catholic priest. And when I was with him, we did traditional egg tempera, and in a Byzantine style. So there are different ways of doing icons. There's the Byzantine style and more of the Coptic style that you would find with Egyptian iconographers. And so you'll learn more about the Byzantine style with me tonight. So if you go to the next slide, Joel. Okay, so what is an icon? I talked a little bit about this when we were looking at the 3 three friends or the Trinity icon just before. So icon, it's a sacred doorway. It's an invitation to be a part of, not to be a part of, but to enter into a relationship with the divine, with the eternal. And it's kind of a doorway between the two worlds of our world and the world of our incarnate God. So that's what they're meant to be. They're also known as a window where so the purpose of an icon is to enable a face-to-face encounter with a holy person or make present a sacred event. So, and they're written, they're not painted. So an icon is, even though you use paint, it's written. And I'll talk a little bit about the process in a little bit, but you're not being creative when you do an icon. You're following the lines of those who have come before you. So there's not a whole lot of creativity in making an icon. It's more of the process of going from chaos to light, to an image where that you can commune with. And so there is a theology of color there. And the icon, like I said, just you go from dark to light. You go from dark colors to light colors. And so as I walk through that process, you'll see that a little more vividly. And it's visual communication. So it's a Christian truth in visual form. So this is where you can taste communion. You can read the word and it can go into your heart. And this is something where you can use your eyes, and through looking at an icon, you can meet the holy in your heart. And then the image in itself is actually imageless. And let me read you something from Sacred Doorways that might help you understand this a little better. It says, according to the ancient teaching of the Christian and Eastern Orthodox Church, an icon is a door. If you cannot believe that it is a door, never mind. For you, I hope that icons come to be seen as beautiful and rich pictures, showing God and his work in a visual language that can be understood. So the image is really kind of like a visual language. It's almost like if you came to Joel's class last night and you saw the word shalom, it's kind of a language that you learn as you pray with these icons and as you interact with them. So this window or this image that you're looking at is kind of, you look at the eyes more than anything else. The eyes are the most intriguing as you look at an icon. So the eye is the lamp of the body, and if your eyes are good, your whole body is full of light. You find that in Matthew chapter 6. So the icon is, the eyes are the most important and should be the most intriguing as you look at an icon and as an iconographer writes an icon. So if you'll go to the next slide. So just a little bit of history. Icons began to be developed before Constantine, so they've been around for a long time. And icons have been influenced by Greek artwork. Greeks were very graceful and had clarity of composition. Also Roman artwork. The icons are definitely influenced by the Romans because they're hierarchical. the placement of figures is important, and symmetry of design is important in Roman artwork. And then there's Middle Eastern influences. And so you'll kind of see some of that in the icon examples that we'll look at in just a few minutes. So in 726, iconoclasm kind of hit, and it was because of the Muslim influence in the Middle East. And so because of this iconoclasm, Muslims don't like images of anything or anyone. And then that influence of the second commandment, where you should not make any images of something holy. Many of the icons of those early icons were destroyed. I think that there's a place, I think it's called Catherine of Sinai, which has some old icons that are still around, but many of them were either painted over or destroyed. And so we don't have all the icons from the early church, from those first 100 years of the church. So there are two different styles of icons. There's the Coptic, which is more of the Egyptian style, and the Byzantine. And the Byzantine is more of what I learned, but the Coptic is very interesting as well. So I've got, I think that's my next slide. So if we could go to that. No, not yet. Okay, so another thing that's important to realize is that the early church did split. If you learn church history, you realize that the church split into the Western church and the Eastern church. And so the Western church, and how we're part of the Western church, as we see art, art is the expression of the individual and influence of his environment at a particular period of time. So with Western art, and you can see it in our art museums, there are no strict rules. I mean, there are phases of art. I mean, you've got different time periods where people are doing different things. Like you have Monet and Renoir, who are more interested in light, for example. But there's no strict rules. Also in the Western world, we have art for art's sake, which in the Eastern world, they'd be like, what? They wouldn't understand that. And artist renegades, revolutionary statements with artwork, or the viewer who can go to a painting and not even know the artist and can interpret it. That really doesn't happen in Eastern iconography. So in Eastern iconography, art is the expression of the historical Christian church, its traditions and Holy Scripture. So it's not art for art's sake. It's a process of writing that's been done for centuries, and you don't create your own lines. The lines have already been created. The patterns, the cartoons are already in place. So if you'll go to the next slide. So iconography, it's a visual language. It could communicate a Christian truth of a spiritual reality, and it's made by believing craftsmen. So, and that's really key. So this visual language is like a direct communication, like music is for the ear, or a fragrance is a fragrance for the nose, or the Eucharist is for the taste. The icon is visual, is something visual for your heart, something that you take in and that takes you in. So icons communicate precisely. They stand in opposition of of deconstruction art theories in which everyone who looks at a picture is free to make up their own ideas about an icon and what it means. No, icons communicate Christian truth in a visual form. That's why they are created, and that's why they exist. And they're rooted in a tradition that's handed down from iconographer to iconographer. Let's see, let me see if there's anything else I need to, okay, so the spiritual reality that I'm talking about is, it's a thin space that when one actually prays with an icon, there's a thin space when you're praying that you connect you connect to the eternal, and there's the icon is just there as, like I said before, as a doorway, as a tool to become closer to the divine. It's not divine in and of itself. It's just a piece of wood with paint on it. But it's blessed and used for prayer to take your focus from your life to the life eternal. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the process itself is theological. When you're writing an icon, you go from chaos to darkness to light, and then light upon light. The material that is used is organic. So egg tempera. It's on wood. It's made with gesso, which is marble and glue. So everything is organic. And then there's just tons of symbolism. And that's where learning the language of an icon is so important. One of the really cool things that I learned from Father Damien is that if you see an icon of the nativity of Mary and Joseph and Jesus, you will always find an ox and a donkey at the nativity. And the reason why is that if you look up Isaiah chapter 1 verse 3, it talks about the ox and the donkey being with the Emmanuel. So it's really interesting how the icons really teach about scripture and about truth. So with the material and the theology, it's all the material is created by God. It's not evil. There's no idolatry in iconography and in icons. And there's also a sense of an encouragement of the incarnation. So as you use an icon, as you look at it, I've got my icon right here, so I'm looking at it. So as you look at an icon, as you think, as you pray with an icon, the attitude of your heart would be one, the encouraged attitude of your heart would be one of Mary, who says to the angel Gabriel, "Let it be with me according to your word." That kind of open-hearted, open life, Lord, do with me what you will. That is the attitude to which we should all come to prayer anyway, but the icon is there to help with that attitude. I hope that's making sense. Okay, so let's move on to the next. Okay, so tree to tree. So I want to talk a little bit about that. So now I'm going to just kind of walk through the process making an icon. So this is the base of the icon that I created, that you've probably seen the process of it in the common area. So this is the actual icon. It's not really big, it's kind of small. So the first step is actually to start with wood. And so, and it's kind of interesting when Father Damien talked about the icon, he talked about, we go with an icon, we go from tree to tree. So you start out with the tree of, sorry, I've lost a piece of paper. You start with a tree like the Garden of Eden, and you think about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and how we broke that relationship that we had with God by eating of that fruit. And so Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden. But we also, we enter back into the garden. We enter back into the relationship that we have with that broken relationship. We enter back in because of Jesus Christ and the tree on which he died. So so just using wood represents the Garden of Eden tree, and then also the tree that the wooden cross that Jesus died on, to remind us both that we are made in the image of God. We've fallen short of that image because of sin, and then Jesus brings us back to relationship with our eternal God through the cross, which was also called a tree or wood. So that's what that means, that tree to tree. So that's the base of an icon. We're invited back into the garden because of the tree, because of the cross. Okay, next slide. And so after you get your base, then you add the gesso. And gesso is just, layers of plaster, which is crushed marble and fish glue. And so you get the gesso and you sand it until it's white and shiny, so that it will enhance the brightness of the paint when you add paint to it. So you have this glow of inner light, the light that God speaks into the world at creation in Genesis chapter 1. This is kind of the beginning of the icon. So these layers of meaning and symbolism are part of what you see when you look at an icon. So before I go to the next slide, which we'll start talking about different colors, but so this egg tempera that we used is, it's the first time I'd ever used egg tempera. Egg tempera is very persnickety. It's not easy to work with. And, I only done it that one time. So I was so pleased to have an instructor that was with me, so I didn't mess up too horribly. But as he talked about the eggs for egg tempera, I learned that a country hen, so a hen that lives in the country, the yolk of the egg is a rich yellow, and you can actually, Emily Ure, who lives in Moyock, and she has chickens out there, and sometimes she'll bring the eggs in and share them with us. And it's true, the egg yolk is kind of this yellow orangey color. And so iconographers that are very picky about what their colors are, how their colors are made, they choose country hens, and they're best for painting flesh tones and men's faces. Now, a town hen And, you know, if you go to Harris Teeter or Aldi or Food Lion, you're probably getting a town hen kind of egg, because they eat, you know, like courtyard scraps. You're going to get a paler color, a paler tone in the egg tempera paint. And so that kind of egg is better for painting faces of women. So just kind of interesting information there. So, okay, so we've got the gesso and we've sanded it down and it's nice and smooth and it's bright and white and shiny to remind us that God spoke light into the world. He said, let there be light, and there was light. Okay, and now let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is what you would call a cartoon, and I actually traced this from another icon. So I didn't make up any of these lines. These lines were already there from another icon, and that icon was from another icon. So this cartoon, what they call a cartoon, is the drawing. It's the size and plan for this particular icon. And so this icon is actually, it's not Jesus, it's not Mary, it's actually Gabriel. And so you just take and you trace that, and so on top of the gesso. Okay, so next slide. Okay, and this is really hard to see, but what we did there is I actually didn't trace it on you trace it on the tracing paper, and then you take the tracing paper and you poke holes through the tracing paper so that you can barely see it. The cartoon is on the gesso. I don't know if your eyes have to be really good, but it is there. So it's just kind of pin marks. And when I say pin, not P-E-N, but P-I-N, pin marks through the tracing paper onto the gesso. Okay, next slide. Okay, and then the first thing you do when you start with the image of an icon, you start with the gold. And so this is the preparation for the gold. There's a special solution that you put on, and then the gold goes right on top of that solution. And that gold is not really a halo, it's symbolically a circle, a complete circle and it's symbolically a complete circle, and the whole thing's gold to represent the eternal light of God. So behind Gabriel is the eternal light of God, God's the best expression that we have of the eternal light of God. So it's not a halo, it's a full circle. It's just Gabriel's in front of the circle, so you don't see the entire circle. Okay, next slide. So here is the gold was added. And so I put the gold on first, and then what comes next is a solution that is, I can't remember what all is in it, but it's an egg tempera solution that's called, that they literally call chaos. And you put it on top of the entire piece of wood, and it is, you don't paint it, you puddle it. So I did use a brush, but you stick the brush down into this solution and you just puddle it on, and you can spread it around, but you don't paint it on. And then you just let it dry. Okay, next slide. Okay, and then you start with your colors. And so this is what I was talking about, where you start with the dark to go to the light. So so I usually when I was in school, and I did a studio art major, and my favorite medium when I was and it still actually is my favorite medium, are pastels. And so when I draw with pastels, I draw and I'll put some dark and then I put some light next to it. I mixed colors on the on the page itself, but you don't do that with iconography. You just take the color and you just puddle it on and you spread it out. And so it kind of stops at the edges of where you've put the pen marks in. So it's kind of boring, to be perfectly honest, but it's actually meant to be that way because it's not about being creative. It's about being prayerful and thinking about the process of making the icon, because making the icon itself is a prayerful experience. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is Father Damien, and I just loved him dearly. And he's working on my icon. I was starting to add a little light to it, and he said, "You know what? Your Gabriel's going to have a blemish if I don't help you out here." So he was helping me out, and I'm so glad I have this picture. This is the only picture that I have of him, but he was so wonderful and so prayerful, but also had a great sense of humor. He asked me a little bit about our church, and I told him about our traditional service and then our more contemporary service. And he was like, "Oh, contemporary service, is that where you put the words on the screen and you sing it?" And I was like, yeah. And he was like, "Oh, that's like karaoke church." I just thought that was so funny. Okay, so that's Father Damien. So we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so then once you have the colors down, you start to work on the features. And so that's where those lines where they've been there the whole time, you just take and you emphasize those lines. And so he would say, "You know what, you're going to dream about these lines because that's," and he was right. I did, because there's so many lines that you just go over very, very slowly and very, very carefully. So the hair is symbolic for strength. The blue ribbon, which is the little squigglies that kind of go out in the gold, that's actually blue. It's red right now, but it'll eventually turn blue. That means heavenly court. So that's a symbolic for that. And then the ribbon is also represents energy and power. So all of that is, you're starting to realize that this is a very important image that's being created. Next slide. Okay, and then we continue to go from dark to light. So so you just slowly continue to add color and light to create this the image of Gabriel's face. And I had to get a lot of help with this. It was very intimidating, and I'm so glad. So this Gabriel is a part of a triptych, and I'd love to finish the triptych at some point, but I feel like I need Father Damien to help me finish the rest of it. So Gabriel is actually looking to the center. A triptych is a piece of artwork with 3 pieces. So Gabriel's looking to his, where are you looking? He's looking to his right. And so Gabriel's on one side, and actually the angel Michael's on the other side, and he's looking the other direction, is a mirror image of Gabriel. And then Jesus is in the center of this icon, of this triptych. So I only have Gabriel, and I'm so glad I didn't do Jesus, because the last thing you want to do is give Jesus acne or give him the wrong color or something. So I was really grateful that I was doing an angel. So that darkness, you can see that darkness to light. And Gabriel doesn't really look like himself yet, but the features are getting lighter. So you can go to the next slide, Joel. And so you see that, okay, he's becoming, the skin is becoming to look more like skin at this point. And you can go to the next slide. And then we filled in the background. I think the eyes were the very last thing that we did, because they're actually the most important for the prayer process of an icon. Okay, and you can go to the next slide. Okay, and then I just called this friendship, because you kind of just fall in love with this. Especially, this was a week-long event, and when we finally got to the place, we're working on the eyes, it's just, oh yes, this is definitely something that I could look at and pray with. And so there's Gabriel and almost his finished form. And if you go to the next slide, and then the varnish on the top. So if you'll go backwards just one to the friendship one. So I think this is when we were getting really close to the end, and we're Father Damien's trying to get us all finished, and so an icon doesn't really become an icon until it's blessed. And so we took our friendship icons, what I call the friendship icon, to a service. We would pray in the mornings with Father Damien in the evenings. And he actually blessed each one of our icons with holy oil that came from Hawaii that smelled absolutely amazing. And so he blessed them, and then we varnished them. So the eyes, if you'll go to the varnished Gabriel. So his eyes, it's kind of like a light bulb, and there's a shadow underneath. The shading is different, so that the light comes out. I mean, it was such an incredible experience to experience the entire process of making the icon, and how prayerful it was, and how he said, you dream about these lines, and he was right. All the lines in the hair, and how intricate they were, and how it does look like that they're moving, and just amazing, And so so if you go to the next slide. So icons are really an invitation for us. I mean, they're learned more in the they're used more with Eastern Orthodox churches, but I think that they're wonderful tools for prayer. I think that in our world, we have so many distractions, and sometimes praying is so difficult. And too often we feel like we need to use too many words. And then too often when we don't want to use words, our mind just wanders, or it goes to questions that we might have, or dreams that we might have. And what an icon does is it helps us focus. It helps us focus on and intentionally focus on the eternal, and to use an icon as a door, not to worship the icon in and of itself. They're not saints, but to use that icon looking at you, and you looking through the icon into the eternal, helps you focus on Jesus and his presence in your life and in your living. So let me see. Let me look at my notes here. One of the things that I also love about the icon, I usually keep this in my office, and no matter what I'm doing, I can always look at the icon, and the icon's approachable, no matter what mood I might be in, no matter what might be going on. And the eyes of the icon just trying to draw me upward. And it's just such a beautiful instrument of prayer. So that's kind of all I had to talk about. I somehow missed a slide. I thought I had another slide in there. Just to tell you a little bit about the Byzantine and the Coptic. I would encourage you, if you're interested in icons, I think I'm glad that I was trained in the Byzantine because of Father Damien. However, I would love to do an icon that's more Coptic. The Coptic icons are more simplistic and the eyes are much bigger. And I love that. I love that the eyes are bigger and they're a little more simple, which I actually enjoy as well. So I would love to entertain questions um, or yeah.
Awesome. Well, Valena, this is great. I think we do have some questions. I think before we get to that though, you've probably got a whole room full of people who are ready to sign up for a week-long retreat to write an icon. Excellent job. This was amazing. So we do have some questions. The first one is Peggy wants to know the gold process. Is that gold leaf? Is that paint? How did that work?
So yeah, so it was real gold, and it was in a sheet. So I think that's would that be gold leaf? Peggy, I'm not sure, but it was it's real gold, and it was just in this tiny little sheet, and it was very persnickety to get that on. And if you look at my icon closely, you can see that it was my first one. But yeah, iconographers can get it so it's just completely flat. Mine's a little rough, but yeah, so it was in this really, really thin sheet of just gold. Yeah.
Awesome. Great. And Peggy also wants to know, where did you take the class? So what was, where geographically, and then the setting? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I can't remember the name of the retreat center, but it was in North Carolina in the middle of nowhere. I mean, nowhere. There were some cows, that's about it. And it's just beautiful Catholic retreat center that's run by a priest. I was there 10 years ago. I hope they're still there. And Father Damien is a good friend of the priest that runs the retreat center. And so that's how they get Father Damien, and his class fills up very, very quickly. That's why I'm so thankful. I think Jim just kind of convinced them that I would be a good candidate for the class, and they let me in. So that was really nice. But I would love to get Father Damien here. He is just amazing, and he did a mural at Christ in the Desert Monastery where I went a couple years ago, and it's so beautiful. He's so talented, but he goes around the world doing icons, and that's what he does. And he does these workshops every now and then. So such a rich experience. Yeah, so the setting was, it was all, a lot of what we did in silence, which I like silence too, but it wasn't totally in silence because he was teaching us the whole time and telling us jokes and telling us stories. And there were women there that had been coming back to this retreat for years upon years, and they were very talented. So it was, yeah, it was just an amazing experience.
Sounds like it. It's awesome. Yeah. And on that, kind of as a follow-up, so how much time did you devote to writing this icon?
It was between 8 and 12 hours a day.
How many days?
5 days.
Excellent.
Yeah, with lunch in between, but you have to, you do things, you work on it, and then you have to let it dry before you do the next layer. So it was such a, and he just encouraged us to pray. He would tell us stories to keep us focused. So it was definitely and I think I read a couple of these books while I was there. So I was learning more about the process in the midst of it.
That's great. So what do you, I know you keep your icon in your office, but there's a question about what you do with your icon.
Um, I just look at him mostly because he's very handsome. But I do, I pray with Gabriel sometimes. I do, but the prayer is more of just of a focused kind of staring. And I can get kind of caught up just in looking at him. But praying with icons has, I grew up in the Presbyterian church. I didn't even know what an icon was until I went to seminary, really. And so, something that was always really intriguing to me when we started to talk about them in church history. But I kind of see it, I see it kind of as a companion. And a friend earlier today was telling me that in when she was going through chemo, that there was a woman that had a book with a icon on the front of it. And so when she was having chemo, she took the icon and she just held it like this. So they symbolize this incarnation, this God is with us. It's kind of like, some people have those crosses that they just hang on to when they pray. To me, it's kind of like that. Now, for Greek Orthodox, they might not say, don't hug your icon, but for the Protestant in me is like, use it to help you pray. I hope, did I answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. That makes perfect sense. Valena, can you please tell a little bit more about how this experience of writing an icon was a religious, spiritual experience, and was it sort of like meditation?
It was, the experience was definitely meditative. It was also, I loved the fact that I could pray and puddle you don't really call it paint, you puddle the paint. So that part was really, really awesome. And I took my time. I didn't have to rush to go anywhere. It was such a peaceful week. And it was communal. We weren't doing it by ourselves, which I loved that. And I loved that I had a guide and instructor that would, share his experiences of icons and the experiences that he had and his spiritual guidance. So it was definitely a meditative experience in actually writing the icon, but there was also a communal aspect with the other participants, and then also really a mentorship as well.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. And then the next question sort of it piggybacks off that a little bit. Is there a requirement for a priest to be present in order to write the icon, since it's a faith experience and not a creative one?
I don't know if it's a requirement, but I certainly do. I bought the stuff to be able to finish by myself, and I've just let it sit in a box. And he actually gave me some gold to finish as well, because gold is really expensive. He was like, oh, here. He would just, that's the thing about priests. They'll give you anything. So I have all the material, but I feel, I don't feel experienced enough that I could actually do one without help. And I think that, that going from, I could definitely get the gold and the chaos, But as far as building that dark to light, I feel like I would need more mentorship. So I don't think you have to have a priest, but it's almost like, potters and other artists have apprentices. It's almost like, if you're really serious about doing it, or if you want to do it for the first time, to be under someone is, I think, important.
Excellent. Just a few more questions. So the next one, can you talk about what a popular subject matter was? For example, Mary, angels, saints, and how are the subjects chosen? Does it depend on faith community or culture or individual?
So one of the most, popular subjects is Jesus. But the icons are commissioned. So it really depends on, a church commissioning a particular icon for something. So there are lots of icons, the nativity, there's the Lord's table. There's all sorts of different kinds of icons, and it really depends on the church and who's commissioning it. There are also icons of saints. And I think that Father Damien actually ended up doing a lot of saints for different families. And of course, it costs money. So it ends up being, um, who can afford to commission one as well.
Excellent. And so yeah, I have a question for you, and you kind of answered part of it. Just the way that you explain the process of writing an icon, and it's almost like as much of the writing of the icon is the spiritual value for the individual writing it as there is for the person that looks at it afterwards. And so I was just curious to know, throughout history, um, were there groups of people that wrote these icons, or was there, individuals would write their own icon that they would keep at home? How did that play out? Was it something that people did kind of as a spiritual exercise?
Yeah, so in the Greek Orthodox Church, you have iconographers that create these, and then people buy them to use them. So a a, a true priest or a Greek Orthodox would be horrified to see an icon for sale, like at, I don't know, Target. They'd be like, no way. I mean, because people don't understand what it is. So so the so I think that, the church is really careful about where icons are sold or are available, I should say. So if you go to a Greek Orthodox uh, library or bookstore, those are the best places to find them. We saw that, and when we were in Turkey and Greece, of course, there were icons that you could buy at certain holy places. And then of course the actual icons, and then there are also reproductions of icons that can be blessed and bought as well for use.
Awesome. And so one final question. Uh, is the paint oil paint or another type of paint? And can you talk about the process of the pigmenting of the paint that you used?
Yeah, so it was so Father Damien had this powder, and he would take he would actually mix it for us, and that's another thing. It's so intimidating, and eggs go bad, and so your paint goes bad. But he would add egg, and then this pigment, and some water, and sometimes some oil, and mix it up and just say, here's your red, or here's your gold. So what was the question again? Like, how did we?
That was the question was about is the paint oil paint or another type, and then I was curious to know how it was colored and toned and pigmented
Yeah,
for use.
yeah.
Awesome. So another plug for having somebody guide you through it.
Yes.
Another part of the process. Um, Excellent. Well, those are the questions that that we have. There were a number of comments as we went through about how beautiful the pictures were, and certainly thank you so much for sharing the insights from the process of writing an icon. And so, with that, is there any final parting thought you'd like to share with us before we say goodnight for the evening?
I think that you know, I love the process of creativity, and this was the process of creating an icon was something totally different, and it's something that requires prayer and patience and perseverance, and um, and I'm just so grateful I had that experience, and that there are folks out there that use icons every day, and I love the fact that the church is so big that we have so many different ways to pray and honor um, honor our Lord and Savior.